Welcome everyone, welcome Ben. This is a super amazing event today. It's the first time that we have some kind of a fireside chat. So we had presentations before for the mentoring club, but today we will meet Benjamin Mann, who's the CTO of foodpanda. We actually used to work with each other 2 years ago in Delivery Hero, where foodpanda is part of it, but I think Ben will talk a bit more about how this is structured. And before we actually start, I will give you some overview about what this event series is all about and what the mentoring club is. So the mentoring club is a non-profit platform, non-profit initiative that I, together with my colleague Jess Dewald, started in 2020 when the pandemic started as well. So both of us were sent home from the companies where we worked for as an engineering director and the product director. Our teams stopped working for a while. Yeah, both of us working in the travel tech company, and you can imagine how this changed the reality for such a company. And then we both thought, okay, can we maybe just share some knowledge that we have, some experience that we have? So we posted that offer in LinkedIn, and a few weeks later we were hundreds on both sides, hundreds of interested people and hundreds of other people who also wanted to donate their time for pro bono mentoring. And during over time, right, over 2 years now, we built the platform ourselves with a couple of volunteers helping us on the engineering side, on the UX side. But it was never more than 5 people, and we grew to more than 10,000 community members today. And we started a couple of more things where we think that actually can help other people to grow and to learn. We had a podcast, we have a blog, and we started also this series with online events where we had talks about artificial intelligence, where we had talks about product, about starting grassroots movements like three weeks ago. Today, a couple of hours later, there will be an event about finding a venture capitalist for your startup. Yeah, now we have Benjamin Mann, CTO of foodpanda, as a guest here. For not a presentation, but for a discussion about engineering management and what it means to be a CTO of a company that is global and has such a big workforce. So yeah, hi Ben, and nice to see you again.
Hello, so nice to see you again. Let's get started. Excited.
Perfect. So we got a couple of questions from those who booked a ticket with us. Actually, we've been around 200, I think 260 tickets were not sold because it's free, but registered. So it's quite a big event. And yeah, let's start it. So maybe if you would tell us a bit about your job at foodpanda. What is it to be the CTO of a Asian-based food delivery platform?
It's interesting for sure. So I'm running all of tech for foodpanda and for part of Delivery Hero. That means we're around 800 people now in tech already, in 4 major hubs: Singapore, Berlin, Taiwan, and Istanbul. And that alone keeps me already very, very busy day in, day out. And mostly I spend my time on a couple of big buckets, right? Number one, how do we make sure that we have the right people in the right roles at the right time, which is often much more difficult to answer than it sounds originally. How do we make sure that we move our business in a direction that helps achieve its goals, while we're also ensuring that we're somewhat raising the bar consistently around tech, right? And how do we educate our technical and non-technical, especially our non-technical stakeholders about stuff that's happening on the periphery, whether that's future risks or upcoming trends, opportunities, shifts, and how they would influence our business and move our business into unseen territory or unprepared territory. And that's roughly what it's like to be a CTO of one of the largest delivery organizations in the world. Fun, never boring, not one day.
That sounds good. That sounds good. I think fun is definitely one important part of it. And if you start losing it, right, then something probably goes wrong. Is this like different, or how is it different from what you thought it would be before achieving that level, let's say?
it's funnily enough, it's not so different, and on the other hand, it's very, very different, and the level of differences are sometimes still surprising me, right? So as the CTO, I always have this tongue-in-cheek joke that CTO stands for culture, tech, and operations, and not for chief technology officer, or chief shit shoveling officer. That also happens, but I need a better acronym for this. But what we do in essence, and how is it different, is the things that I meant at the beginning. How do we ensure that we have the right people in the right roles at the right time? It in essence means, how do we ensure that all humans around the world that work in our organization are having the most productive time of their career, which is surprisingly more complex as the organization gets larger and larger and more distributed. When I had smaller engineering teams under some of my previous bosses, one of them apparently here in the call. Hey, Ollie, nice to see your name here going on. So that the answers to this were more clear-cut. As the organization and the business gets faster, it's not so straightforward anymore, right? Same with the question, how do we build the right tech and the right products that turn our users into fans? You spend a lot of more time the larger the organization is in the fine parts of the details. What always surprises me on any level, every time I made a jump in seniority, I had this almost blissful hope that the amount of firefighting will now go down a little bit. It does not ever. Anyone who entertains this, I can tell you, no, it doesn't. And what's very surprising also is, especially if you're coming from smaller organizations and smaller teams, like how often you need to make very critical calls about a recent unprecedented shift in the business or in the environment with very, very limited information at the time. That is, even though it's a regular feature of the job, every time it happens, it's surprising, right? And that entire thing is the stuff that they don't tell you, that they tell you before you start working as a CTO. That's going to be a book, by the way, sometime next year. And that started as a tongue-in-cheek thing when I was sitting in the office, and I was having one of these days where every 10-15 minutes something happened that I'm like, holy, what do I do now? Right? This never happened before. And that's where we are, right? So it's a job that is incredibly fulfilling, incredibly fun every day, but it has this side to it where you gotta be really, really cool with ambiguity and uncertainty, because you're gonna spend a significant amount of your time in that space.
Perfect. That's actually a really, really nice topic. So what happens when something goes wrong? I remember when I worked at Delivery Hero as well, right, 2 years ago. There was one Sunday morning at 5, I think. I got a call from someone in Singapore saying, we have a problem somewhere in, I think, Thailand or Taiwan or Philippines. I don't know. But I think what a lot of engineers that then work on that problem don't know is what happened before. So can you tell us a bit about how do you get paged, or who calls you, and how do you make sure that you actually then find the right people in the organization to work on that specific problem?
It depends a bit on the nature of the problem, but most of the time I get informed via 3 possible channels, right? Either some automated alerting that I'm still paranoidly monitoring starts pinging me madly. That happens quite a lot, at least in a lot of the parts of the problems. Very often also thanks to an incredibly strong team that works for me and with me. We're now at a state where I learn of the problem only after that's solved, and that's an incredibly satisfying feeling to have when you're on vacation and there's a bigger problem happening and your team is just sending you a WhatsApp message. Hey, Ben, this is what's happening, just FYI, in case someone reaches out. And then an hour or 2 later, you get another message, solved, here's what we've done, just in case someone wants to know. And so these are the moments that you kind of live for as a CTO, because you can lean back and say, I can go on vacation and I can go without my notebook and without my toolings on my phone. That's very, very healthy, right? Very rarely, luckily, very rarely, it happens that we learn of a problem and a customer first has it, and that's usually not a good thing. And then it just goes through internal channels. Finding the right person is luckily much less of a problem than it was, I think 3 years ago, maybe, or maybe 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, because toolings and operational processes have just gotten so much more mature, right? With on-calls and the right tech stack and the right monitoring and observability in place, that problem largely goes away. You still have in every organization probably some area of confusion where sometimes stuff gets ping-ponged, but we use these process breaks also to do a really nice RCA afterwards. And they're like, why did this take an hour to figure out who should be the person on call? Or why did the on-call person just not react to it? And every of these incidents is a really nice opportunity to figure out stuff, not where a human failed, because that's really rarely the case. It's more, where do we still have a process in place that allows a human to make a bad decision under stress or an unfortunate decision under stress? And we're kind of trying to weed those things out with our RCA. And so far it works well. Continuous journey, work in progress. I think it's one of the spaces that never will be done, but I think we're getting there.
Maybe to give the audience a little like sense of volumes here. So what actually happens when the platform would be down for, let's say, half an hour?
If we are down for half an hour without going into actual numbers, which would be always a bit business confidential, but if we are down worldwide for half an hour with our platform, we make evening news in these countries, right? So I remember this still. We had this beautiful incident in one of our countries where we broke our own stuff, right? Happens every now and then. And in the evening news, there is a TV announcer going, don't order from this company right now. It's broken and they haven't fixed it yet, which is always great, or not so great if you're in the country. But it's an experience also to have and to cherish when something really goes wrong and you're working on something that's so important or so desirable for the people that if it doesn't work, it goes on national TV, which is nice. I truly mean it. It's nice if you can work on something with your team and you know it's going to be used by millions and millions of people every day.
Yeah, I agree. At the same time, I also see that there's one big challenge, especially in the last 2 years, right? With this pandemic and everyone working at home or in like even global distributed setup. For, let's say, us as managers, right? And for you as a CTO, it's kind of easy, right? To really be engaged with the company, to identify yourself with the company. But then if you have many people who probably don't even know each other and there's a lot of processes and there's a lot of layers in between, how do you as a CTO make sure that the people in your teams, not the managers, but the individual contributors, actually bring the ownership and have the sense of identification with the problems, with the company?
I think it starts already by making the right hiring decisions, right? So you want to hire people that have this strong sense of ownership and that want to work on something mission critical, but because not everyone does want to work, and there's nothing bad about not wanting to working on mission critical thing, right? But you need to have a certain enjoyment of chaos, I almost say, if you're working for a really large global consumer application, because something will break. It's just the nature of the game, right? And then assuming that you're hiring the right people, it's like you want to spend a lot of time with the organization, but with your direct reports, and then they hope and encourage them to do this as well, to make it really clear what is important and why. But be a bit more waggish on the how, because this is, you want to really get this bottom up from your teams. But everyone that should work in our organization should have a clear understanding why their job is important and how the hard work and the long hours that everyone sometimes is asked to put in drives two things forward: A, the business, and B, their personal career, right? If the why on it, the answer to either of those two sections is unclear, then I think it's time to have a conversation with your manager. And as I see some of the people from my organization, if the answer is still unclear, do hit me up afterwards on Slack. But I think that that's very important, right? And doing this on larger scale and also on smaller individual chats, I think is critical. I have this thing that I say in every all hands, and luckily more and more people pick me up, and I say, if something is unclear, or if you want to know something, or if there's something that you want to talk about, and I really don't care whether it's tiny or huge, it's like, hit me up on Slack. I'm very open to have these conversations. And I think that's mandatory almost for engineering leaders to have to be incredibly approachable. As much as you can make it work, and then even more so, because otherwise than that, if the organization becomes too large, you get these isolated pockets that have a bit of less attention, maybe because they're working on something that just not in the super key focus of the company, but still critical. And this is where an information void start to happen. Right? So I think over communicating is a thing. We could do much better, of course. Again, it's a work in process, but I think we're getting better there also.
Perfect. I want to jump a bit. Many years back, maybe not so many. I don't know how what's your age, but what was your first job in tech actually?
My first job in tech, I was a software engineer, right? My first job as a salaried employee in tech was also a software engineer. So I've been an engineer for a very, very, very long time in my life. So I'm now 45, and I started coding as a kid when I was 9, 10, something around that age.
Nice,
so
nice.
I've been doing
what language was it?
Basic. And the reason for it was very simple. So I inherited a Commodore C64, for those in my age group that remember this beautiful work of technology. And I got this from my grandparents because they upgraded to, I think, 128 or something super fancy at that time. It already had floppy disks. And with this thing, I inherited games. And I started playing games, and then my mother made a very, very forceful statement that impacted me for the rest of my life, because she said, dude, I'm not buying you new games unless you finish your old games, right? And that was a problem because there were a lot of games and I only had a handful. So, but then I figured out something magical. I don't have to buy games. Back in 1988, 89, there were actual print magazines that contained the full listing of games, right? So you just could get them and type them, or nag your grandparents to help you type them, and then you could play those games yourself, right? So that got me started on copying source code so I could play games, right? But my mother was very iron on this, and I wanted a couple of specific games, and she wouldn't buy me one until I finished the last one that I haven't finished. And the problem at this point in time was I was really stuck on that game. I didn't enjoy it. It was not a great game, and I spent weeks already trying to get past this point, and I couldn't. And she was very no new games until this one is finished. So how do I get myself out of this? Long story short, I figured out the only way to get myself a new game is if I change how this current game works. So I gave myself 999 lives in this game, and a couple of ways to jump more annoying sections. And then I finally finished that game, and I finally got the game that I wanted, which was for, again, the people in my age group, International Karate Plus. Best game ever.
That's such a nice story.
That's how I got started, and in the process of tricking my mother to buy me more games, I started enjoying coding, and I stuck with it ever since.
Nice, such a nice story. I think a lot of people from the 80s and 90s have kind of similar stories for how they started in tech, right? So for me, it was not basic, but Turbo Pascal, building some stuff for my school to get out of the actual presence. and these kind of things. Today it's different, and I was asking this question where you started in the first place, because in the mentoring club we have a lot of juniors, people who are still studying and not really knowing, should they start in a big company, should they go into a startup, or should they even build their own ideas, build their own startups? And that's not really clear, right? So everyone has a different answer to that, because definitely in a big company you learn a lot, but at the same time there's a lot of processes and you have a very small scope compared to probably in a startup, while maybe the depth is much higher. What would be your personal, let's say, suggestion to the 22-year-old people who want to start a job after they studied?
That's a very hard question. I honestly think there is really no one size fits all answers, right? So everything you said is right. But I also do a lot of mentoring here in Asia with young engineers, some of them still in school, some in university, some just coming out of university. And what I always tell them is like, worry about a bit less about the company itself. I mean, obviously you don't want to join a company where everyone tells you like, dude, no, shit company, right? Don't do that. But assuming that the company is kind of all rightish, while you interview, ask like a lot of questions on how they will think of your career progression, especially in the first 2 or 3 years, because man, being a junior engineer these days is much harder than it was 20 years ago. I think like all we needed, or at least all I needed, was like Notepad and a C++ compiler, and I'm good for the first 3 years of my job. Nowadays, a junior engineer, he needs to know like 10 frameworks and like 3 or 4 tools, and then that's before we go into things like clouds. So ask a lot during the interview process. What's in it? How does the company take care of your career? What opportunities do you have to experiment around, right? How is this done for other people previously? Like, what does the typical career progression look like to the next level? And how would the company know that you are on the next level? And then go a little bit with your gut, to be honest, right? So you will get some answers that are highly concrete, because companies have thought this through. These are usually good companies to work with, if you like the context of the answer, right? And then you will get a lot of answers that are kind of like, yeah, you know, after 1.5 years, you're usually up for promotion, and we want you to be collaborative and show ownership and be a good communicator. And this is usually where I say, like, tread carefully, because like, who wouldn't want someone to be collaborative and communicative? It's like some of the generic answers that don't help you. So find places that want to invest in you as much as you want to invest in yourself. Right?
Yeah, and I absolutely agree, right?
Then even a very junior role in one of the biggest companies can be great, or a very junior role in a two people startup can also be right. I do, however, one thing is I noticed, if you're joining very small early stage companies, be prepared to wear a lot of hats, right? I've seen stories from young engineers especially when they're engineer number 1 in a very young company. You're basically engineer and the IT guy, right? Which is not necessarily bad always, but be aware that this can happen.
Yeah, wearing a lot of hats is also good. Let's say term for the next question. So I saw experience in smaller startups. Becoming an engineer means you're a problem solver, right? So probably if it's a bit grown up, there might be some system administrators or DevOps people, but at least in the engineering team that you are, nobody really cares about if you're a backend or front-end engineer. If you can write SQL statements or whatever, you do everything to solve problems. And then in big companies, they tend to kind of bring that into individual roles, right? You have a backend engineer, you have a front-end engineer, you have a mobile engineer, and you have a database engineer, and then this is all very specialized. What's your perspective on that? Should people actually invest into dev, so really becoming the best backend engineer, or should they invest into learning about all of the technologies that you should and can use in order to become more mature as an engineer?
I have a somewhat controversial view on that, because the answer, as usual, in my job is it depends. And what does it depend on? And I just recently had a conversation with a soon-to-be graduate from a computer science university. If you go wide, but shallow, not too deep at least, it comes with the benefit that you can fill a lot of holes, especially in an organization that doesn't really break this down into engineering stacks so much, right? People that can fill a lot of holes, different holes, are usually people that progress faster through ranks at the beginning of their career, right? So if you want to optimize the early years of your career for maximizing the potential payout that you can take away of your career, going wide is usually a good thing. A little bit deeper than junior level engineer, but going wide is usually beneficial if you want to fast track the first couple of years and get faster to things like a mid-level or even a senior role in the right companies that has a lot of holes to cover, right? What happens then, however, very often, if you haven't found your niche and the thing that you want to go deep in because it truly interests you, it can happen to you that you kind of get stuck in this level where you say, okay, you know a lot of stuff, a bit. And there's a specific type of company, very often early stage startups, or very often companies that don't require deep expertise. And there's a good career to be had, right? But then very often people say, oh, but now I'm a senior and I want to join, I don't know, Amazon or Google or whatever as a staff engineer, right? And then the tables turn completely, because there they say, like, dude, like we want someone in that role that is like ultra deep, right? As far as deep as you can in the stack, and they interview for this, right? And that's where then a lot of people get stuck in their career. So long story short, it really depends on what you're after, right? And there's nothing wrong with wanting to maximize the payout that you get of your early career. I think it's a very healthy thing to do for many people. So I would not necessarily say go deep at the very beginning. There is a benefit of going wide also at the very beginning, is very often people don't really know what they truly enjoy, right? Because in your first job, you might get into a role or a type of project or type of software that you just don't really, yeah, you can, but it's like, it's not exciting, right? Going wide allows you relatively risk-free also to experiment with industries and types of tech that you want to work on. Going too deep too early has the drawback that it's sometimes quite hard to switch them in stacks unless you want to take a step back. Me personally, I went deep, and never really went out of certain places. But that's me, and that was just a long sequence of sometimes also very lucky decisions in hindsight.
But what was it that you went deep into?
I started going deep on very bare metal, close to the hardware optimizations of code, right? So I was working as a freelancer before I got my first salary job on things like game engines before there were really game engines around. So I was always fascinated by small but very hard problems, right? That are closer to the metal. And then that translated later in my career into being much more fascinated on the mobile side of things, or on the front end side of things in general. I still could do a lot of backend stuff as well, but like my passion was always more on the end user experience. So I went considerably deeper there, and on the back end, I stayed more on the side, like, good enough for most of the things that you do, and surrounded by myself by much stronger backend engineers than myself.
Well, thank you. The same that we just discussed about individuals can be also asked about teams, right? So there might be specialized teams, like a backend team and a front-end team, etc., or how they call cross-functional teams or product teams. How is it typically structured in foodpanda, and also what's your preferred model for organizing teams?
So my preferred, Delivery Hero, like most other companies, copy with pride what's called the Spotify model, right? So fully functional, cross-functional squads. And in general, I would say that's, for us at least, the right approach, right? I like teams that as much as possible can own the thing that they need to deliver, right? And I still have nightmares about an organization where I had a mobile team that had to wait on the backend team, that had to wait on the database team, that had to wait for the infrastructure team, right? So that's a bit scary for me, but I had like really bad experiences in this phase. So I like that you can build a cross-functional team and really have them have a go at it, right? So I think that works very well. With organizations of scale, however, there comes, as usual, a scale problem to this element. Like now, if you have 2 or 3 of these teams, let's say 30, 40 people in total, that's all fine and dandy, right? If you have now 200 of these teams, you're getting into meta models like, okay, you need Scrum of Scrums or Safe or less or whatever. And then you need Scrum of Scrums. So there is a certain scale limit in which you need to now to experiment. We are in foodpanda and Delivery Hero, I think we're starting to hit that limit of scale. So it's time for us to experiment a little bit on how the future looks like. I don't have the answer, to be honest, because it's one of the things where there's a lot of different models that all in generic sound really good, but generic models of software engineering are like generic models of management. They're absolutely pointless if they don't work for your specific organization. So we're going to experiment here a little bit in the next couple of months what could be a future setup for us, right? So personally, up to a certain scale, I'm all for cross-functional teams. It just makes life for everyone, including the people in the team, much easier.
I agree. We have a similar setup, but then there's of course the alignment process, right? So then you start projects that kind of span multiple teams and so on, right? And this then needs also a lot of effort, right, to manage. All right. Into a team, right? There might be now a situation, and we talked about individual, like the career paths of individual contributors, but there might be someone, be it a junior or a very senior principal engineer, who might approach you or one of your managers to say, actually, I decided to become a manager myself. What should this person bring to actually start that or change that career path to become a manager?
So I get asked these questions a lot, right? And my first counter question usually surprises, if not shocks people, because I usually ask like, why? And while there's nothing wrong with any kind of motivation, there's one particular motivation that I'm always not against, but somewhat suspect. When someone tells me, I think it's the next logical step in my career. It's a bit spider senses are starting to tingle there. Because A, we work in an organization where it's guaranteed not, given that we have parallel IC tracks and M tracks, right? B, it's also difficult if you haven't thought about why do you think you want to lead people, right? What do you get out of this for yourself? I'm unsure whether it's simply the right motivation. There's vastly different motivations why people want to do this, and not all of them are better than the others. Actually, most are not better than the others, and that can be, oh, I want more influence, or I want to help people grow, or I think I'm a coach, or I'm just enjoy Excel sheets or Google Sheets a lot. Pain of every manager, they do exist. So the reason is simple, but you should have an answer, right? What do you want to get out of this? Simply, it's the next logical step. Is usually, I'm not so keen on that, right? But okay, assuming that you have an answer, what should people bring or have when they want to manage people? A long list of things, but I think the first and fundamental is you gotta be able to handle hard better. many people, I think, make a dramatic miscalculation and sometimes say, oh, with more experience as a manager, certain problems just go away or become easier. Newsflash, they don't. They don't go away and they don't become easier. But what's possible is to handle hard problems better due to experience, more awareness, and whatever, right? So instead of thinking as a young manager, how do I make it easier to manage people, right? Try how can you get yourself to a level where hard becomes, you are better able to handle hard, right? Handle hard. The second advice that I always give to people: be chill. In general, as a manager, you will have days where, I'm sorry, there's no other word, but batshit madness will hit your desk, right? Nothing that you can prepare for. It pays to be relatively zen in these moments, because panic and anger and all the logical emotions that you will feel, they never help solve the problem and they make things dramatically worse, usually, right? So having some level of self-control and self-regulation and stress coping mechanism is also very critical for ICs, no question about it. But as a manager, these things simply become more important because you will be faced with problems of other humans much more than in an IT track, and it will be your job to solve them. And sometimes you will be asked to make decisions that are just not pleasant to make, right? There are some situations for which there is just no pleasant outcome for the people involved, right? It helps if you can self-regulate in this space, right? And the last thing that I always tell people, and I think it's a very crucial skill for managers, and most people learn this way too late in their career and only over time, be aware that the vast majority of decisions, and by vast, I say at least 70 to 80% of the decisions, are extremely easy reversible should you make a wrong one. That doesn't mean you should be careless with your decision making, but be aware that in many cases, you making a bad decision as a manager can be, and I mean this literally, solved by simply saying to your team, sorry, given all the information that I have now, I'm giving the results that I'm seeing, I can hereby officially state I made a bad decision. Let's undo that decision and try something better. Many people are very terrified of having to stand in front of your team and say, oh, I made a bad decision. Fact is, your teams will like it. It's not every decision is a bad decision, and that's clearly a problem with your decision making. But teams will appreciate you as a manager standing in front of them and say, yeah, I made a bad decision, my bad. I'll deal with the impact of it, we'll roll it back and we'll do something else. A lot of decisions that you have to do in the day-to-day life as a manager fall into this category. Knowing this makes them often very less stressful, and it prevents what I call trivial decision over analysis, where people then spend weeks and months, I've seen this, months on trying to get the last nuance of every potential scenario. And I've seen scorecards with 25 parameters on how to make a decision. Should you invest in tech debt A and tech debt B, or tech debt B? And the difference is like, on a scorecard from 1 to 10, 9.12 versus 9.11. And then you discuss another round, why you're going, where do you get the 0.01 more? Don't usually. Be comfortable with making decisions, making good decisions with far less time and information than you think that you need. You will go wrong every now and then, but the vast majority of your decisions, assuming that your mental framework for making decisions is somewhat solid, will be right. And your life will be easier and your work will be more fruitful and your frustration will go down significantly. So I think that's the three things. If you're starting out as a young manager and you have these three things down, you should be good.
Yeah, thank you. That was super helpful insight, I think, also for the people watching us. So it's literally the actual change or the difference between being an engineer, right, where you have to be right. So you cannot ship something where you think, oh, maybe let's see what millions of our customers will say when they see this, or if it goes right, to actually having enough of analysis and enough of technical knowledge to have the options right, to understand the kind of decision room or space, right, and then be able to decide fast. I think that's yeah, also super helpful insight. Knowing about technology is also one of the controversials, right? That is discussed a lot. So becoming a manager, maybe first line manager with 4 or 5 direct reports, obviously you need to be somehow hands-on, right? So you need to work with the team. But as soon as you achieve a level where you actually lead leaders or lead leaders of leaders and so on, the technical knowledge kind of maybe not disappears, but becomes less of an importance. Like what do you think? How hands-on should like senior managers, directors, head ofs need to be successful?
Depends what you mean with hands-on, right? Should they be writing code? Do I write code as a CTO? Absolutely not, right? Luckily for my organization, I have a large number of way more talented engineers than me, right? But I also think it's dangerous if you as a senior engineering leader are not able to have a reasonably adequate engineering conversation, also about complex things with your team. I think if you end up in a situation where, I don't know, you sit with your infrastructure team or you sit with a mobile engineering team and they want to explain you a specific problem, right? And you absolutely cannot grasp even like the first 2 levels of this, I think then you're too far away, right? Because very often, as a senior leader, you will be asked to make a decision, right? And the team will come to you for input. And at least I have not seen an engineering team, but I think it's probably the same for every domain, whether it's engineering or product or finance or whatever. But if you don't have an understanding of the domain in itself to an adequate level, I think you're just going to be in trouble at the top, right? I always try to explain this the other way around. If I'm hiring a VP of finance, right, or a chief financial officer, do I expect him to do accounting himself and close the book? No, right? But I would expect him to understand accounting. Right? Otherwise, I think it's going to be problematic. I think what helps in our industry is that much of the knowledge translates nicely across stacks and across technologies. But being too far away from your engineering team in terms of tools, skill sets, problems they face, I think will lead to a lot of very dangerous blind spots for an executive, right? And while we need to get, especially as C-level executives, we need to be like really cool with having a couple of blind spots. Our personal domain or personal technological expertise should not be a complete blind spot, I think, at least.
Yeah, I agree, right? It's probably the hardest, right? To stay at the level that is kind of sustainable, so where you don't need to write a lot of code to understand the concepts, but actually be able to understand what, for example, external companies mean when they want to sell you something, or when someone comes up with a decision and so on, right? Yeah.
Sorry, no, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I wanted to go to the next topic.
Just as a final point, especially as a senior leader, you also, it happens rarely, but on your technological expertise, companies will occasionally make 100, 200, 500 million euro decisions, right? So turn this around and think as a CEO of a company, would you want someone to give you input on a very clearly company breaking decision potentially from which you know he has no reasonable understanding of the area that he's running? It's like so yeah, I think you shouldn't code, especially, or you shouldn't write production code. I think in my role, I think that that would be terrifying, but you should in generally be a passionate technologist.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good closing statement for that part. So I'd like to go also, or give our audience a chance to ask questions. We already have one in the chat, and yeah, just write it there if you have questions yourself. So Matthew asked, how do you approach the learning with and for your employees? So do you leave it to them? Do you give them room for learning? Is there like a day learning every week? Should they only learn about hard skills or soft skills? Yeah, what's your approach here?
So there's multiple questions, and I'll try to answer all of them. Right. So the elephant in the room question: do you leave it to your team leads, or are you hands-on with employee learning? So I'm hands-on insofar that there is specific areas where employees often reach out to me and ask for some sort of coaching or advice, and I'm happily to do this, right? But that's on an individual case-by-case basis, right? On an organizational-wide point, we do have several learning platforms and we do have several learning toolings, and I'm very supportive of all of them, and we have extra money for it, and people have personal budget that they can use for it. But for the individual senior directors and VPs of engineering, and we're talking about people that have also somewhere between 100 and 200, 300 people under themselves, right? It's for their spaces, they are much better suited to figure out which employees need which learning path, whether it's more focused on hard skills or more focused on soft skills. So we do both, and it's a matter of the growth plan of the individual and how the individual wants to go to the next level. So again, there is no black and white answer to this. I'm hoping that answers somewhat the question, Matthew. If not, just maybe a follow-up question.
Yeah, there's the Q&A feature in Zoom. So if you want to ask questions there, please do so. There's five other questions. So the first one is actually someone trying to get access to first like to your knowledge about how you approach partnerships. I think they're exploring Q-commerce API for foodpanda to bring merchants to your platform. So, and the question is, how do you go about partnership eventually obtaining API access? Is this something that you can answer here?
If there's a specific business request for business partnership, feel free to approach the quick commerce business team here in foodpanda in APAC to talk to them about this. All right, cool. And click answer live. Yes, done.
Cool.
Do you have any advice for junior, Drew? Do you have any advice for junior engineers who are doing mid-career switches, e.g. a new IC1 engineer with 2 years of non-technical? Join our foodpanda mid-career program where we do exactly this. So we recently launched a program where we take career switches from whatever previous expertise, and we put them through a 6 months training with classrooms and on hands directly also on the foodpanda tech stack. We pair them with seniors and principal and staff engineers as mentors. If you cannot join the foodpanda program for this, and you still can because we still have open roles, at least when you're based in Singapore for this. So look it up on LinkedIn, it's there. But if you cannot do this, the most effective ways is to be very transparent with a company and look for companies, many companies, whether they advertise it or not, they have a program like this where they say, it's a 3 month boot camp, it's a 6 month boot camp, it's falsely called an internship, which is also a bit problematic, right? So reach out to companies and ask them about the availability of such programs. I've seen them now in multiple companies, and they are an amazing thing if you want to put in the hard work. So do reach out. Don't assume that any company will take this career switch for granted from you. Unfortunately, it won't be. So ask for it and demand it a little bit also, right? Most companies will do if you ask. All right.
I think the next one was covered already, right? So what's the valuable traits in a techie in an early stage startup? So wearing many hats, etc.
Yes, handle hard better, be in love with chaos because you're going to get a lot, especially in an early stage startup, and don't be overly fixated on job titles because they mean nothing in an early stage startup for absolutely the right reasons, right? So it is specifically to early stage startups, these three things, right?
The next is a follow-up question for something that you said before. So you need to become better in handling hard things. So how do you do it personally? How do you learn to handle hard things better?
How do I personally get handling hard battles? You fail a lot, and that teaches you harsh lessons on handling hard better. But it's also, so that's one. And more importantly, you need to actively figure out for yourself in which spaces you want to be able to handle hard better, and then put yourself into situations where these are needed. For example, I am not a great public speaker. It's not one of my things, right? But kind of it comes with the role expectations, right? And I'm getting like nagged from our PR team also, Ben, do more public. So I've started like a year ago to intentionally put me in situation that normally if I would have my free choice, I would like, wow, public speaking? No, I'm sitting here in my room, I'm good. So I plan to do more of these things. That's the only way, right? Find yourself hard problems and hard situations and then willingly put yourself into and accept the fact that sometimes you will just fail and then you try again.
It's a kind of a learning opportunity for you today as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Very much so. But this is online. This is easier, no? Like the real audiences, people sitting in front of me.
But that's super interesting. So also at the mentoring club, we first thought, right, that the mentors will teach or guide or help other people. What we get is that people actually donate their time and do this pro bono mentoring because they learn a lot about people, about talking, about leading conversations, about all of these things that you reflect on. So it's always a two-sided thing, right?
For sure.
So what is the next one?
Sorry, mentoring teaches you way more about yourself than you will teach other people.
I agree. So yeah, for all of you, if you want to register, right, just go to mentoring-club.com. It's an amazing community already. All right. So the next question is, do you hire someone that really better than you technically? So who's really better than you technically? How do you handle when it comes to problem-solving decisions?
Absolutely. I think that's a must for any CTO or senior engineering leader. You gotta hire people, not only technically, ideally, you want to have direct reports or team members that are all better than you in something, not in everything, right? Because then they should have your job if they're better in everything, quite frankly. But tongue in cheek a little bit, in a bizarre way, hiring people is a way to make you obsolete, right? So you want to have a team that's strong enough that the next person to step into your role does it better than you and comes from your team, right? And you cannot do this if you only hire people where you know on every aspect of the job you're like 1 or 2 levels above them, right? So don't do that. So yes, hire always someone that's better than you in whatever space you can, right? And then how do you handle it when it comes to problem solving? Problem solving, simple frameworks, like when it's specific problems like root cause analysis, 5 whys and whatnot, right? How did this problem happen? I think what's also very important when you look about problems, a great way to look at a problem is never assume it's a human's fault. Never, right? Always assume that you as the leader in the organization have created an environment where a process is possible that makes a human do a bad decision. The bad decision itself, even if a human made a bad decision, it's a consequence of you having an org where bad decisions are possible. If you start with this, you eliminate a lot of potential problems, solutions like, oh, we need better training for people. Yes, that's true, but that's very often not the end solution that you're looking for, right? Or the human did not follow a run book. Yes, so you can now tell the human, please follow the run book, but there's a reason why he didn't follow it in the first place, right? And there's a reason why this was possible in your organization. So see every problem and issue as a process problem first and assume good intention from every human. It will make any kind of post-mortem and root cause analyzing much more interesting and open, because you know now everyone involved says, okay, this is not about me, this is not about me as a person doing something wrong, this is about improving our organization, right? Decision making, multiple frameworks. Like I like scorecards a lot personally because they just make things very simple. And as my direct reports are and you still probably are aware, like I can be super annoying with my scorecards. At least I want decisions to be relatively clear in relatively few numbers, right? But every framework that you can Google works. There is nothing, there's no magic in the decision making. What's important, however, is to retrospectively take inventory of all your decisions and ask yourself honestly which one worked out and which one didn't work out, and avoid hindsighting. Hindsighting meaning the result of a decision was bad. That does not always mean the decision was bad. There could have been other factors that turned the result bad, right? So do a real retrospective, not on the outcomes of your decisions only, but on the decision-making process itself. If you do this regularly, your decisions will get much better in a really, really short amount of time.
So I think we are almost out of time now. It's 2 in Germany. What is on your side? It's I think 8, right?
8 p.m. But I have 15 more minutes for people that want to hang on.
Perfect. Then let's do that. I think I can also extend my productive lunch break here. So then, let's go to the next. So I think it's related to what you just said, right? So what you said is actually you look for people when you hire, but when it's about problems, you need to look at it not from a people, but from a systemic point of view, right? And if you don't do that, then organizational problems like politics can come up. So how do you look at this, right? Maybe you have an example. How do you solve maybe a difficult fighting or political situation at foodpanda?
Difficult decisions, to be very honest, at a certain scale, most decisions are difficult decisions, right? So, but specifically, right, difficult challenges, and it pays a little bit at the beginning, or plays a bit back to the beginning. What is really crucial if you're about to make a difficult decision is that you are neutral to it, right? Your role as a senior executive and as a manager, but especially as a C-level, right? Your role is to ensure that the best decision is made for everyone involved, right? And that means sometimes for parts of the people affected by the decision, as I said, there's just no good outcome that can happen, right? So what you want to do is to make sure that your decision-making process and the way you implement that decision are fair, transparent as much as possible, and fast. So no one likes uncertainty a lot, right? But there's really no, except of trying to handle hard decisions as much as you can, there's really no secret on making difficult decisions, right? Because someone's asking there, like, face fight or flight situations. Fight or flight situations, unless you are in a very unfortunate situation in real life, usually don't exist in organizations. Whenever someone talks to me about this is a life or death situation, right? In 25 years of working, I have not encountered a life or death situation, right? Very often, personal involvement or personal attachment to one of the outcomes makes it a life or death decision, but in reality, objectively, most of them are not, right? And how do you deal with organizational politics? Again, unpopular but very true answer. When you put more than two humans together, you will get politics. It's a completely normal part of human society. It exists, right? And you say you can't look for if someone tells you, oh, we are a non-political organization and it's a 10,000 people company, you can already turn your back and run because it is not. The question is, more importantly, is how do you understand how politics works, and not to play the game, but then you can make a decision how much do you want to involve yourself in and how much do you want not to, because that choice you have. You can say like, you know what, man, I don't do this and be done with it, or you can understand what's happening and try to navigate it properly, right? But you will not avoid organizational politics. What helps always with organizational politics, because no one complains if they are in their favor, right? People only complain about organizational politics when they prevents them from getting something. What really helps to make politics a much more interesting part of the job is to assume good intentions in everyone and see where it leads, right? If you start playing political empire building games, someone once told me, I don't remember who it was, play stupid games, win stupid prizes, right? So you want to avoid playing stupid games and play games that at least are meaningful and fun. Which brings me to my next question. Do you still play games while being the CTO? I mean, not while being the CTO, but there's a Cyberpunk chair right here. I cannot twist my camera to the next room because there's my game setup. So yes, I do quite a bit.
And still doing what your mama told you, like finishing one before you go to the next.
I have no comment for the unlikely scenario that my mother would listen to it, but yes, no, absolutely not. Okay, if I'm way more games than I can ever finish, I'm blaming my mother, right?
Okay.
All right. Let me quickly jump to the other chat there because there's a question that I like. What are the things a new engineering manager should focus, and what are the necessary skills needed to move to the next level as such as engineering manager? I hear this a lot. Here's my very unpopular answer. If you're really a new engineering manager, and by new, I mean like less than a year in the role, the first thing that you need to forget is thinking about the senior manager role, because that's a couple of years down the road normally, right? So focus first on being really good in your new engineering manager role. The number one advice that I give everyone in a management track, if you're a new manager and you didn't so far spend time learning all that you can learn about human and organizational psychology, do so now, because that's by far the most important skill that you will have as a manager, right? Everything else, including technical knowledge, yes, it's important, but everything else is secondary to your understanding of how humans think, feel, and act in which situations, because your job as a manager is to get results through a group of humans, not through yourself. In order to get results through a group of humans, you need to understand how humans think, act, and feel.
That's probably the perfect statement to end this session, right? So it's all about technology. Yes, it's all about organization. It's all about everything that we face in our jobs every day. But yeah, a manager in tech is still someone who, as you said, get things done through others, and with that you need to understand people, right? And I absolutely agree with this. And this is, I think, yeah, probably this can be the title of your book that you mentioned before.
There's another question. I'm gonna do this last because this one is interesting. Also, the others are not interesting, but this one is specific interesting. Obviously, every company is different and may depend on security, but in your experience, how many years does it take for startups to switch the culture from chaotic and ping-pong decision-making to more structured and seamless approach? Two possible scenarios. Lightning fast, usually when a massive catastrophe hits them that forces them to. If left to their own choices, never. plain and simple, right? Even the most prominent, famous, awesome 100,000 people companies in the world, you pick any random employee, they will tell you their culture is chaotic, there's ping pong decision making, and everything could be more structured and seamless. The bigger the organization, actually, the more of this you will find, because you will find certain areas that, yes, are well structured and seamless, and you will find a large majority of the complex still somewhat in a half organic, half accidental chaos mode. And many companies, including foodpanda and delivery here, we kind of like it a bit there, right? So we do not want to go overboard in that space. Companies, what very often happens to the other companies is they get hit with something awful, security incidents, downtimes, fraud, whatever, and they're being forced to implement a very rigid approach, which also usually is not a space where you want to be, right? So I've yet to see a company, but maybe I'm just especially unlucky, that went from pure early state chaos to streamlined, process-oriented, high performance across the entire corporation, right? It's just, I've never seen it. If someone has a great example, hit me up. I would love to see it, how that, and talk to the CTO.
I don't have one either. I mean, even from the very big companies, corporations, where you have a lot of processes and, you know, compliance stuff in place. Even then, right? This is just a layer, and if you go one level deep, again, you work with people, and people do politics. People are different people, and so on, right? So, this is
and very quickly, the last question that someone asked, can you recommend a book or other resources for learning about organization and human psychology? Literature is vast, but if you know nothing, you cannot go wrong with two books that are going to be vastly different to whoever Googles them. Whatever is your nearest reputable university that offers a degree in psychology and organizational psychology, find their one-on-one entry course material, find the book that they recommend and read it. It will have everything that you need for your first job as an engineering manager for a year or two.
Perfect. All right. Also, by the way, there's a book library at the Mentoring Club as well, where the mentors actually put their book recommendations in the platform, and then you find, like, for every different topics, like for leadership, for tech, for human resource, for recruiting, like there's, I think now 100 different books being recommended on that platform. So good.
Yeah, whatever they're recommending there for human psychology, like, go look it up. I'm sure it's good.
Perfect. All right. So I think then this was a very fast hour. It was actually 70 minutes. Thank you a lot, Ben, for being with us, for a lot of very insightful ideas and insights into your day-to-day job. We will publish this soon, I think in a week or so. And yeah, maybe some last words from your side.
No, it was a lot of fun. If anyone wants to continue this conversation, hit me up on LinkedIn and we can follow up and connect there. Well, thank you very much. It's now 8:15 here in Singapore, so I'm finally going to go have dinner. Have a great day. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Ciao. Bye.